You're now tuned into the Real Rap Radio Show. I'm your host, Walil Archer, on Down to Hot Radio. I have a special guest with me. I have Bill Gertz. How are you today?
I'm great.
Awesome. So excited to have you to talk to you today about your book.
Mhm.
Let
Okay.
the listeners know about the name of your book.
So the name of the book is Land of Forgotten Fish. And it's an interesting story how I came up with that name. My last book was called Broken Dreams. And when I went to Amazon, there were 100 Broken Dreams titles. So it was actually very hard to find. So Land of Forgotten Fish kind of works well because it's not a name that is recognizable. So it's pretty simple story how I came up with the name. And it kind of has a good feel to it.
Okay, and then talk to us about the book. What inspired you to write
Sure.
this book?
I mean, so I've been writing poems for 50 years now. So a long-standing thing I've been doing. I decided to publish because I had a little more free time, and I thought it was good to get these poems out. So about half the poems are from the 70s, and the other half are from present day. So that's the inspiration. It's kind of my whole life story, broken down into a series of poems.
Okay. Now, when you written this book, did you do it by chapters or how did you do each section?
No, it's basically poems. So it's surrealistic and beat poems. Each poem tells a story, and I've got about 60 poems in the book, all telling different stories, inspired mostly by my travels and feelings, inspired by the great beat poets in San Francisco in the 50s and early 60s, and also the surrealistic poets that came out of Paris post World War One and pre World War One.
Okay. Now, out of the 60 poems, which one would you say is the most memorable one and why?
Hard to say, and they're all kind of stand on their own. Um, I would say none of them are. It depends on the person who is reading it, really, because different things will touch different people in different ways. So, for me, they all have equal weight. They all come out of a same place, but for the reader, they're going to have their favorites and things that they either don't get or can't interpret for themselves.
Okay. Now, which one, and I know it's depend on the reader, but which one would you say probably would be the reader's favorite one if you
I,
had to?
it's really hard to say. I mean, you know, all just scrolling through the book now. I mean, they're all very interesting in terms of the latest ones. I have a poem called "I Gave Up Waiting for New York to Come to Me," which I kind of like. And from the older ones, I have poems like a kind of vicious poem number one. Um, so there are a lot of poems, the early poems. My Tenement Days is a good a poem because it reminds me of my time I spent in New York City in the 70s, living in a tenement, a four-room, what they call kind of a walk through. So that was kind of the days that I was really struggling a lot financially, and so I wrote this poem on my daily walk. So people might like that one. I like that one very much. It reminds me of the time when I lived in the village in New York and was very free, wasn't working much and kind of wandering around New York City, which I still love to do, wander around New York. And So that's kind of one of my favorites. But again, the reader will decide what their favorite is. And I've gotten a bunch of reviews on Amazon, and that's where people are commenting on certain poems that they like.
Okay. Now, would you like to read that poem to us? Would you like to share it with the listeners?
I certainly will. Just gotta we'll find it here. We'll take a minute. So let's see. Yeah, my tenement days. So I'll just read this poem out. And past Sutter's, then the peacock, and the bread in Zito's basement. My tenement days are behind me now. Xmas tree off the fire escape, walking uptown with a beard for our bed. $10 dinner, strolling down 8th Street to sell dreams on the street. I could barely talk. Was I happy or sad half 100 years ago? I can't recall. My worries were flower petals, but little did I know. So to me, that's like what I used to do, walking around. I had a magazine called Dreams Magazine, which was a kind of a home published thing, and I would walk around trying to sell it. But I don't, was I happy or sad 50 years ago? When I look back on it, it's hard to tell, And my worries were flower petals because I didn't really have any serious worries at that age. When you're 20 years old, um, you kind of your worries are all flower petals. They're all really stuff you worry about, and the next day it's kind of over. It's not life, death, food. It's just kind of flower petals. So that's one I kind of like. I like the flavor of it. It reminds the Zito's was a bread store. I threw a board. I used to throw my Christmas tree off the fire escape, which was kind of cool because I lived in a tenement and there was no way to get a big tree down. So I just dump it out the window. And walking with a board on my head, the bed was hard, and we went downtown and bought a board. And I had to carry kids. That's what kids do. They carry stuff. Nothing got delivered in those days, so I carried a board on my head to make my bed softer. So these are things kind of that flow through my mind 50 years later. So I try to remember it. Sometimes when you get to be my age, it's easier to remember 50 years ago than yesterday. You know, like what'd you have for dinner yesterday? I don't remember. What was this TV show about? I don't remember. 50 years ago, I kind of, it's indelibly etched in my mind the things that I did. So I write about that with a perspective from now, looking back, which is kind of interesting. And a lot of the stuff I wrote 50 years ago, I'm not sure I love it anymore, because people change, but I can recognize that that's how I felt then, but now things are a little different.
Now, when you was writing this book, did you experience writer's block? And if so, how did you overcome it?
I don't, I mean, writer's block with poems you don't really have. I mean, you just kind of, with a novel or a short story, you could have a writer's block. With poems, I mean, you just put it down for the day, and then the next day something else comes up. So the way I write it, sometimes I think of a title first, and it's just a great title. Like lately I've been coming up with a title, like one of my latest poems, Veal Cutlet. I mean, that's an odd name for a poem, Veal Cutlet. But kind of, I had that headline. Then I said, well, let me write a poem about it. And of course, it's nothing about veal cutlet. So there's a real disconnect there, but it sounds kind of cool. So a lot of it is flavor. What are people gonna like? What's gonna, turn them on? Poetry, people remember phrases. They remember attitude, emotion. There's no beginning or end, although a lot of my poems are kind of stories about people that I don't know. And a lot of my poems are based on places that I've been to, and sometimes places that I haven't been to. I tend to write a lot of dark poetry. You're not going to find any, Moon June Spoon in what I write. You're not going to find any uplifting poetry. Probably not. You're going to find more real life stuff of what Americans and people around the world are going through now during these difficult times. So I try to reflect that. I try to really think about the world, and the poems kind of come out of that.
Now, did you face any challenges when writing this book? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Um, I mean, there were really no challenges. It's challenging just we're finding, which of the old poems still have validity. Do I want to put in there? And then the new poems, when do you stop writing and say, okay, I have enough for a book? That's a challenge in itself because, in a way, you want to get the book out. It's a year between Broken Dreams, my first book on Land of Forgotten Fish, my second book. It's a year. I didn't want it to go longer than a year, but I kind of didn't have enough poems. So I had to kind of force myself to write. And sometimes when you force yourself to write, the poems aren't that great. So then you kind of have to select them. I don't do a lot of editing on my poems. Maybe I should, but I don't. I like them to flow the way they were originally written, rather than to go in and say, "Is this word right? Is this word right?" I don't do that. I just keep. Um, I would never finish a poem if I was that kind of poet. So the kind of poetry I write is a lot of stream of consciousness stuff, and a lot of things that just come to me, and I leave it. I leave it rather than going back and editing it. It's not a perfect work. It'll never be. With poetry, it's kind of, and nowadays, with everything, if I ever wanted to revise, I could, but I'd rather just write new stuff.
Now, what would you like the readers to take away from reading your book?
I think kind of first of all, whatever they want to take away from it, it's really up to them to decide. I would like them to see where I've been, get to know me a little bit, where I've been, where I've traveled, what my point of view is, and I'd like them to basically, understand some of the images, um, but really make them think about kind of the poems themselves, the people, the characters in the poems, the stories I'm telling, and I want them to really enjoy it in a way. I mean, they're not gonna. It's not a poem. It's not a book that you read and go, "Wow, that made me feel great." It probably won't, but it'll make you think, and I think that's kind of what I want people to do.
All right. Now, where can they purchase your book at?
So my book is at Amazon, of course. W.L. Gertz is my name, so it would be Land of Forgotten Fish by W.L. Gertz. Barnes and Noble, of course, as well. I have a website which is www.wlgertz.com, and that has kind of my story, an interview with me. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on TikTok with W.L. Gertz. The publisher is Atticus, a well-known San Francisco publisher. So my books are available there. Selected bookstores. I have this thing where I go into bookstores and I leave copies, which is kind of until I get caught, because I want to get them out there. And I usually do chapbooks before I do the final book. So I'll do like kind of a sample, which I'll publish in England. I have a publisher there as well, and so those are much more inexpensive. So I'll give those out, and I'll put those in bookstores in New York City, San Francisco, Paris, and I do readings. I have a reading in Paris on July 11th. So if you have any French listeners out there, you'll see me there. And I've done readings in Milan, New York, kind of everywhere. So I like people to hear the poems, to hear me read, and I also like them to buy it. They could buy a Kindle edition or whatever. So there's all kinds of different ways. It's interesting that I'm back to poetry and publishing. So that's kind of a cool thing for me.
Awesome. And as we close out, any final thoughts or closing remarks?
No, I think it's important that poetry is kind of a neglected art. For good reason. It's not that as accessible. The stories are, might be, it's only for a certain kind of person. I think poetry and the kind that I write, which is a little darker and a little more beat oriented, um, I think is not that accessible, but I think people are going to get a lot out of it. So I hope people will read the poems and decide for themselves what they think.
Hey, Bill, well, I'd like to thank you for doing the interview today.
Sure. My pleasure. Take care.
You too. So that's my time today on the Real Rap Radio Show. And I'll see you guys next time on the Real Rap Radio Show with your host, Walil Archer on Downtown Radio. Peace and blessings, everyone.